Like we have a really nice group of participants today for our free webinar, so thanks again for joining us. Our topic today is focusing on the end of one-size-fits-all recruiting. And we all know that this is a hot topic for our organizations, especially at this time of year as we're in our organizational planning processes and spending time looking at our workforce trends and initiatives already going into 2017. Personally for me, it's hard to believe we're already at the end of this calendar year. It seems like yesterday it was January. But this will hopefully give you some nuggets as you're considering how you're going to allocate your resources and some of the priorities for our candidates as the workforce continues to evolve and change, and therefore so do our candidate expectations. So we'll be sharing some of those ideas with you today and the trends that we experience as well as a number of our clients experience. For a couple of logistic items, just wanted to let you know we do have the phone lines muted for participants just to help with background noise. We know there's some groups that are joined together, and we want to make sure that we don't have actual noise in the background for other participants. So I do ask that you use the chat feature that's in the flyout menu. Generally should pop up on the right-hand side of your screen, and we will be addressing questions at the end of today's webinar. So if you have any, please by all means share that. We will unmute the lines at the end of the session as well. Logistically, also right above that chat feature, you'll see on the flyout an area called handouts. We have provided some additional materials that you can download, and there are 4 of them there. We thought it might be helpful for you to pull those down and reference those. Those are free for your use. I encourage you to grab them and take from them what you can from a learning perspective. So those handouts are Novo pieces of information that helps us cover what we're talking about today about recruiting. There's some information about talent effectiveness solutions with Novo, as well as copies of 2 recent blogs talking about this very, very important topic of making sure that you have a diverse recruiting program. So please, by all means, at any time during the presentation, grab those and go. All right, so just as we get started here, just for an introduction, I am the president and CEO of the Novo Group. Thank you for having me with you today. As I lead this amazing organization of HR and talent acquisition professionals, our focus is exclusively on helping organizations improve their workforce effectiveness, whether that's through finding the right talent, nurturing that talent through progressive HR solutions, and being that augmented team that helps during peak times of need for your organizations. We lead very innovative practice offerings, and we'll talk at the end for just about a minute or less about those, but I just wanted to share a little bit with you about that. My background, what I bring to the table in this particular webinar is over 20 years of experience leading different human capital organizations in a variety of different industries, a variety of sizes of organization, and at all of the various stages of a company's life cycle, whether it's a startup, whether it's a turnaround, considering high growth in environments. It could be through mergers and acquisitions. So with that background, I'm going to add a little personal color and flavor to some of the experience about this evolving landscape as well, through some examples of things that have been done. So again, thank you for having me today. So what we're going to focus on are some really key points around the dynamic recruiting landscape. So what's changing, what's current, what should we be anticipating as we look ahead in the next couple of years? And then what's changing about the one-size-fits-all approach, how we got there and why it's changing and evolving away from that, and what are some of the things that you need to inspect within your own programs to evaluate whether or not you're keeping up with those trends. We'll touch briefly on employer value proposition, or EVP, because in HR we have to have acronyms for everything. And then we'll talk about the candidate experience and what their expectations are, especially now that we've got 5 generations in the workforce, and how do we cater to the different needs each one and the expectations each one has. And then lastly, some takeaways for you about building an inspired and flexible model, which is what we're all here to learn about today. I always like to step back and pause and think about what are the leaders of our organizations expect from human capital. What do they want us to deliver upon? And it's never a short order of things that we have to do. So I've got a couple of quotes here, topics from individuals who have been recognized in their organizations as having top talent machines, if you will, the top recruiting machines. I'll just pick on a couple of these. Zappos, if you like shoes, you probably know about Zappos, now part of Amazon. I love the quote here is, to make customers happy, we have to make sure our employees are happy first. So that emphasis on putting talent priorities in the right place is a key theme. I love the Quantum Workplace quote of, engaging the hearts and minds and hands of talent is the most sustainable source of competitive advantage. And then even just highlighting one more is engagement is a renewable decision daily that is voluntarily given when the company has proven worthy of it. So while some of these quotes focus on what happens after an employee is on board, the emphasis that we need to focus is, how do we create, define, and communicate, evangelize, if you will, the cultures of an organization to the candidate pool so they understand what your talent perspective is. That's EVP, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But clearly this is on the minds of executives and something very important for us to keep in mind. Well, let's talk a little bit about what has happened over the last number of years. So, arguably, we're about 6 years past the Great Recession. Whether we came out of it fully or not is probably up for debate. But ultimately, what happened during that period of time is, we all know in the recession we contracted resources, especially in human capital. We know that we shed recruiting talent, we cut costs where we could, and we moved very swiftly and adopted the more of a cookie cutter, that one-size-fits-all recruiting program approach for a number of necessary reasons at that time. One is, having a single program was far more cost-effective to manage and to lead, especially with a smaller team. So it was almost out of necessity that organizations very quickly had to migrate and say, how do we do as much with less as we did before, if not more with less? How can we then, with fewer internal leaders leading and managing the recruitment program, how can we execute still while keeping a pipeline going? Because we all know that while a recession will be a time of contraction for most organizations, if you've been through those types of cycles, you know on the end of a recession, that trigger for growth can sometimes be sharp, kind of like the hockey stick on a chart. So even though we're 6 years past, we still have not truly recovered our teams and where we're at, even though our current talent landscape continues to grow. So I benchmark and take a look at our clients that we work with. Their hiring practices now in volumes have not only returned to the pre-recession volumes, but have grown increasingly complex. Complex in a number of ways. One is organizations, in an effort to diversify their risk of another recession, have done lots of acquisitions. So now we have more locations. We are geographically dispersed. Organizations have really finely tuned their talent expectations and what they're looking for in talent. So in some cases, and arguably, only want that A talent group, as everyone will say they want. I very rarely have somebody say they want to hire C talent. But ultimately, our HR systems and programs haven't necessarily caught up to the changes post-recession. So that's one of the things that we're going to make sure that we cover today, is how do you start easing into a more customized approach that's necessary for the current talent trends. Along the way with this, we had kind of an accidental event. When you scale back your recruitment solutions and your HR teams and your recruiters' focus, you really start to dehumanize the overall experience that candidates have. Now, some of us have been candidates before, and you know what it's like when you send in your resume and it kind of goes into the black hole, and you might get that automated generated email back acknowledging you received it. You might not. and you don't get any kind of a feedback on that process. And that experience is so negative for candidates. But not only that, now candidates have choices, and we're going to talk about that. This is clearly moving from a organizations market and buyer's market to, from a seller's market to a buyer's market, and no longer do you see the same volume of applicants and interest through passive recruiting techniques. We call it post and hope at Novo, and that's not something that's working for organizations. So in our effort to cut costs and streamline things during another time, now we have to evolve and say what makes sense for us at this stage. You know, on top of it, we've got other implications on our minds that probably keep some of you up at night. How about the looming talent cliff? We know that 10,000 people turn 65 every day. And we know the direct impact that has on our organizations from a succession planning perspective, from an institutional knowledge and attrition perspective. And how are you preparing and how can you equip your organization with the right talent, knowing that the talent that's leaving at the end of their career has a very different set of expectations than the recruits you're bringing in at the front end of their career to backfill them. That plays directly into the generations in the workplace. We'll share with you guys, we have Generation Z, the post-millennial group starting to enter the workforce. We haven't even figured out the millennial approach yet, and now we've got another one to consider. That makes it 5 generations in the workplace. And we have to be able to appeal to those candidates on a very broad basis. And then candidates now expect engagement, the employer value proposition that we're going to talk about. You know, ultimately, one of the things that we've done is we've done a good job telling candidates along the way that we're special as employers, we're unique, we're flexible, some of those, you know, consistent things we say. And now they're saying, put your money where your mouth is and show us and tell us about that and demonstrate it. And an employer value proposition is such an important way to be able to articulate that clearly. So we're going to cover that as well. So times are changing. And if you're doing the same thing you were doing 6 years ago, you know, likely it's time to take a look and inspect what tweaks you can make even in this coming year. The good news is it doesn't have to be ridiculously expensive and complex, and there's small steps that you can make to achieve those changes. Just don't take my word for it. Here's a good quote from Career Builder's 2016 Candidate Experience Toolkit. If you're not familiar with it, you can go on their website and get it for free. It's a very simple set of documents. And what they did is they went out and did a survey of candidates and, you know, found that the recruitment process is exceptionally impersonal. Not only for candidates, but also for recruiters. The enjoyment factor, the job satisfaction for recruiters comes from that human connection for the most part, the ability to see their candidates win and fulfill their hiring managers' objectives. And today's more transactional process really isn't very satisfying on both ends of the process. So the ultimate challenge is, of course, each side of that process has very different ideas about what makes the other side tick. Candidates have a drive for engagement, a need for individual recognition, to feel special, to recognize that their talent is something that the organization strives for, that individuality that we know that our younger generations really pride themselves on. While recruiters are still working within an environment of trying to work in high volume, their workloads are exceptionally high. They're trying to automate where they can and reduce administrative tasks. So when you've got one side of the equation looking for a custom engagement model and another side with the recruiters in-house and the teams looking for efficiency, pretty hard to reconcile those without some changes in the programs. So let's talk about what has truly happened and what some of those components are about the one-size-fits-all recruiting that we've employed. So I kind of scratched my head when I think about, in an effort for streamlining, you know, we've really, you know, have pushed out the human connection point between a potential employer and candidate, and we continue to drive that even further apart the more automation we put in. But we are a society of social connections, and we're a culture that's craving the ability to embrace and express differences and for that individual recognition. So one of the first things, if I were you, to step back and look at your process and your programs and your approach to recruiting is recognize and map out how many automation points you have versus how many direct human elements and connection points you have throughout the recruiting process. So think about your candidate engagement model. Where do they connect? How do they connect? And what's the quality of those connections with your organization? Keeping in the back of your mind that we are a culture of Facebook, we're a culture of LinkedIn, we're a culture of Twitter, where real-time feedback and connection is a high priority. The other thing to talk about is just the difference in how generations engage. So there's a number of different studies in the marketplace that talk about how each generation would prefer to interact with the recruiting team. And I know a lot of you are sitting there thinking in your mind, there's no way you can please everyone, and you probably can't. So when you look at the focus on understanding your workforce effectiveness and your workforce planning, and if you know which generation you're going to be targeting the most, make sure that you map those preferences. For example, for millennials, they want immediate gratification from communication and know that the technology capability is there, that if they express interest in a position, they want to be able to text, they want to be able to email quickly, they want to be able to find you on social media and see the human part of what you're doing. Make sure that that's what your program offers. If you are seeking maybe a little bit more experienced profile of hires, people who are Gen Xers a little bit later in career, or even some baby boomers are maybe a target for what you do from a focused on pre-retiree or retiree staffing. They are not going to look through text and that kind of connection. And I know you know this information, but it's really important for you to take into account, are you targeting your recruiting to the generations you're targeting? And those two things need to be aligned. How about the idea of differentiating where the candidates hang out? It's the language we use. It's not very scientific. It really just talks about, do you really know where your candidates are? For example, if you think about IT technology positions and groups, very active in professional networking groups, and like to go where other technology professionals go. It's a lot of online connection. There's Meetup, and there's a whole bunch of other different ways that they connect electronically. Do you know what those are? And I'm not talking about your traditional job boards and whatnot. I challenge you, go check out meetup.com, and if you look at Meetup, there's different IT groups. So if you're hiring .NET developers, which I think everybody just about is that has any kind of infrastructure, there's different groups that will congregate, and they'll even congregate in groups or pods of people with expertise in a very specific niche or industry. Nobody's really recruiting out there. Do you know what social media sites and other places they go? IT and technology professionals are very comfortable with the gaming world. Do you know where gamers hang out? I didn't until I had to go and do some recruiting there, but that's where we find them better than we do in traditional methods. But manufacturing might be something different. Manufacturing has far more formal places that, let's say, leadership positions hang out. There's a lot of professional organizations for manufacturing professionals. Do you have those profiles? Do you have relationships? Are you spending time building the relationships so that you can build awareness of your organization for the people who attend those kind of specific events? Same goes for operations versus sales versus product experts. They all have different personality profiles. Granted, there's a very wide variety. I don't want to paint too narrow of a brush there. But think about where sales might hang out for a specific industry. A little bit more extroverted group, perhaps, than maybe the product experts that will be seeking niche information. The point of that and what I'm sharing here is to make sure that you understand your target audience and that you take the time to research where they are. Because you could be driving dollars out of your recruiting program by mistake to, let's say, a giant website. Let's say we go to, let's say you're using Career Builder. What if you took the dollars you're spending on Career Builder and got the same number of hires by using niche sites where you start to build a presence and a reputation as an employer? Gone are the days that you have to be in certain places. Indeed has helped to do aggregation. of websites and postings, so I encourage you to not assume that the largest sites are always the best for what your niche needs. But don't take my word for that as well. Again, when we think about what some of the other top executives talk about when they're looking at talent acquisition processes and the questions posed, what is required to attract and engage candidates through the process. A couple on here will all recognize, Steve Jobs. You need to have a collaborative hiring process. That was an excerpt from a discussion about not just collaborative internal hiring and cross-functional interview teams, but truly going to where the candidate is. That's a key priority. Or I like the one on the bottom. First-rate people hire other first-rate people. Second-rate people hire third-rate people. Leverage your employee referral network. If you're not getting at least 20% of your hires through employee referrals, I challenge you to really scrub that. It is the most cost-effective solution you have within your reach to leverage internal referrals. Make it attractive, make it viable. With that, though, you will have to be able to articulate employer value proposition so that people can evangelize your story more concisely and clearly, and we'll talk about that in a minute. It's probably also reminding us that everyone is a brand ambassador and everyone is a recruiter in an organization. So how are you equipping your employees and your hiring teams to help augment your recruiting team? One of the things I've always talked about as chief HR officer in organizations is that HR is a function to facilitate talent initiatives, but talent isn't only HR's responsibility. So making sure that you have a program that engages others also adds bandwidth to your team. Be creative. So if you can't get more resources to your team, recruit internally for others that can help you. So we saw in the previous slide that leaders feel that it is important to have an engaged process. Make sure that it's collaborative. Make sure that candidates feel part of the culture of the organization through the experience they have. We talk about that true candidate experience a lot in what we do at Novo because we know that candidates have options. We talk about the fact that candidates right now are in a buyer's market. They have choices. The average IT candidate right now has at least 2 options active at any given time. That's a great example where you're going to be competing. No longer is it an okay attitude that you're a great organization and you expect that somebody should be proud just to apply to your organization. Instead, it's a mutual decision. It's also, candidates expect that they know that they're different than others. So specifically, if you look at hiring, let's say millennials as a generational group, the fact that no 2 candidates are the same is really important. Look at the things that are emphasized even in the resumes and in the profiles put together. They want to be able to feel like their unique contributions will be observed and valued in an organization. They don't want to look like everyone else, nor do they want to be treated like everyone else. The engagement level of millennials in a traditional job application process is less than half of that for the Generation X and baby boomers, not just because of technology differences, but they truly don't find that a very engaging process. And they're evaluating an organization on how the very first interaction and experience feels to them. We talk about one-size-fits-all also being that kind of uninspired and impersonal. We've covered that before. But what it also doesn't do is make sure that you're capturing individual career goals in the interview process. So while we often hire people for a specific position, we're also hiring athletes. Very important for us to consider that as a career goal process. How do you capture that information with the candidates coming in? Does your application and recruiting process understand where people want to go? So unfortunately, the ultimate experience is that it does feel disengaging. It does feel generic to organizations. And it also feels the same for our recruiters. The second to last bullet here is one that's really important. So a bad candidate experience is certainly shared. So we know the power of social media in recruiting can be very positive. We can get our message out. We can share our employer value proposition. We can get social context out in the marketplace much faster through Facebook and LinkedIn and tweeting it. But I can tell you the power and the negativity of a bad candidate experience is shared on those exact same platforms. And I've shared this story in other sessions that I've run, that in one organization I worked at, we had this happen where a candidate had a pretty unfortunate experience with one of the hiring managers. Just a poorly run interview with probably a poorly coached manager, setting a tone and environment that the candidate certainly found unappealing. That individual went home and put out on their Facebook page the experience they had, and that was shared multiple times about the organization. So the damage and the reach of that was in the thousands. Can't pull that back very easily. We certainly can't censor that, and we can't pull it back either. So candidate experience is exceptionally important. Take a look at Glassdoor as well, another platform for candidates and employees. Now, we all may have our own individual perspective of Glassdoor as being kind of the Better Business Bureau for employers, but it still helps to know what's being put out about your organization, regardless of its context. It's important to know that candidates do go look at that information. They will Google your organization. They will go take a look at what others are saying about the experience with you. So candidate experience matters, and unfortunately, bad news travels fast. And then the employer value proposition must be articulated from the first connection. And I want to talk about that a little bit here next. So a lot of people confuse employer brand with employer value proposition. They're actually two different things. Employer branding is a component of employer value proposition. So I just want to share a little bit about some of the best practices around considering an employer value proposition. I just spoke to a large group of insurance executives in September about employer value proposition and its importance, as well as that it doesn't have to be a monumental task in an organization. So employer brand is truly the recognition that your company has as a brand in the marketplace. When I think of things like, you think of Nike, people recognize their swoosh as their logo, or you hear taglines that we repeat from different advertisements. Those are the well, not only the product brand, but then you start attaching things like employer brand experience to those. So when people hear things like Zappos, for example, as an example of that, you know that there's a reputation in the marketplace that they actually instituted a culture of no managers. What does that mean? So there's employer brand information out there that's recognized. Employer value proposition goes a little deeper. It's what do employees get out of the relationship and for the efforts that they work from the relationship that they have with the company. So there are hardwired things like benefits and flexible schedules and casual work environment and those kind of harder lined and easy to articulate benefits. Things like tuition reimbursement. Those are all great things to be able to highlight. What are some of the intangibles that are a little bit harder to define, like culture? When I asked some of the executives I met at that insurance forum how they define culture, a lot of them had a very hard time articulating even how they define culture, much less their own culture in a very clear, concise way. The employer value proposition needs to be something that you can fit onto a one-page document from a cheat sheet perspective that can be shared with all of your hiring teams, posted everywhere in your office, have your recruiters be able to speak to it, and capture those things that are really unique to your business. And if you don't have an employer value proposition, going and figuring out what it is isn't that hard. You can actually start small and let it evolve over time. An initiative can engage your workforce. You can select feedback and do focus groups to get feedback on a variety of things of why do they stay at your organization? What's unique about your organization and the value they get from it versus going somewhere else? This is a great retention and engagement conversation to have at the same time. And have your employees try to help you define that culture. Novo itself went through an activity of this as we've launched some new practices in the last year and a half. And our organization helped define even our new core values and refined the information that we're a connected organization, that we're client champions, and that we're collaborative. And we were able to define what that means and what are the behaviors in our organization that show it. If you've got an active workforce that genuinely values community engagement, highlight that, if that's truly what you are. Now, it's important to consider the fact that if you think you don't have an EVP, you do. You just might not have it on purpose. It could be happening by accident. Your organization does have an EVP, whether you write it on paper or not. So you might as well capture the most important parts of it. We know that companies who have a compelling employer value proposition, the story to tell, outperform the competition because employees and candidates in the interview process can identify and will engage and be a better fit for your organization based on that. So if you haven't taken the time to define that, by all means, highly encourage you to look at that as a program. And again, small organization or large, it doesn't have to be an enormous project. It can be one step at a time. Here's some other examples of attractive components of an EVP from a survey that was conducted by the Corporate Responsibility magazine. In the blue here, the numbers show what participants, these are people who are both candidates and active employees, say is important or necessary about an organization, while the things in orange are very attractive, and then the two numbers together are obviously the consolidated percentage out of 100%. Quality of work environment is important, so is compensation structure. But let's face it, folks, compensation is not a retention strategy that endures. As a matter of fact, compensation, while often a dissatisfier for individuals in an organization, and it comes up in different survey events, very hard to eradicate that, and it's rarely a satisfier no matter what you do. So where can you move that needle as a draw for candidates? I love the fact that if you look at culture, meaningfulness of work, the benefits package, and the mission or noble purpose outweigh all others. Those are the softer things that we have to think about. Those are the things that can be components of your value proposition. Just one word of caution: as you develop an EVP, something to consider is it has to be genuine. It has to come from the heart of your organization. Make sure it accurately reflects your culture. It doesn't take long for it to be proven out or rooted out that it's not, so make it authentic. If in doing research on what your EVP is as an organization, you find something you don't like, change it. Change it systematically. Make that an initiative, but it's important that it feel genuine. Because some of the things that the EVP will do for you when you think about finding and recruiting talent, you will feed your reputation. You'll give people clarity of who you are. Instead of letting them determine your identity and what you offer, they will very clearly have something to go to as a reference. I mentioned that those companies with an established and credible EVP outperform their peer groups. So higher engagement from the employees and from candidates fuels growth and customer satisfaction. Top talent seeks more than attractive salary. It's the what else are you offering that matters, especially for millennials. And unfortunately, millennials get a bad rap on way too many things from an employee perspective, just because their expectations are different than other generations. So a couple, I joke with leaders when I talk to them. I'm like, well, millennials are here to stay. They are one of the generations. We need to adjust, and we need to engage them. They bring a whole host of benefits to the table that we can capitalize on. And so if we don't adjust, they're not going to adjust either. So finding some ways to engage is a very important thing, whether it be some flexibility, whether it be a casual environment. It could be creating a more fun work environment through the dynamics and even the setup of how your offices engage, seek that input. And then again, those most compelling EVPs are those that are distinctly different and unique to you. All right, moving along in the one-size-fits-all, kind of getting away from the single point of entry that candidates have into an organization through, let's say, a website portal or applicant tracking portal. Some of the things you have to look at in your system as you're evaluating where you may need to start innovating a little bit differently is looking at things like, where do your candidates hang out and are you reaching those places? A lot of people don't know where to start to figure that out, and here's a great place to start. Look at where your top hires for the last 2 years have come from industry, from companies, and then engage them in conversation. Not just surveys. We survey the heck out of our employees. Have conversations, have focus groups. Where would they find you if they were out hanging out, and that's a virtual hangout, in their world of technology? Where do they go on the web? Where would they most likely be able to recognize and find you if you were targeting them more specifically? You have the power of that data at your fingertips. And then understand what's being said about you in social media. Partner with your marketing groups if you have one to take a look and say, what is the word on the street? Have you had, some negative press on Glassdoor? What are you going to do about it? Are you going to do anything about it? Do you need to do anything about it? Take a look and are you active on Facebook and LinkedIn? It's one of the first places people look. Did you know so candidates will go check and see if you've got a Facebook page faster than they will see if you have a website page. So you need to take a look at what are the places that you're advertising and being present. And then on top of it, mobile technology. A lot of applicant tracking systems have done a good job trying to upgrade and change to being, mobile and connected. But if you really want to evaluate the ease of use for your systems, make yourself a candidate in your own process. Kind of live their life or dedicate a few that need to go through that process themselves. Make sure that the mobile technology is flexible and easy to use. Just like we look at from a marketing perspective for customers, we look at how long it takes for them to engage on a website to purchase something. The same mentality and approach applies to your candidates. And then do you know your candidate data trends and measure the right things? Highly recommend collecting and evaluating candidate feedback. Not just those that you've hired, post-hire and what they say about the recruiting process, but how about those that self-selected out or didn't get the jobs? What's going to be their message in the workplace? What would have changed their mind? What did they buy into and what didn't they? You have really valuable feedback in the candidates that you didn't hire, and a lot of companies don't go there to get that information. As I mentioned, the post-hire surveys are really important to gauge people's experience, and doing it very soon after the hiring experience has happened is the best time to capture that data while it's fresh. Also encourage you to do it with hiring managers. And then probably most importantly, are you creating alignment with your hiring team and training and not just emphasizing the how and the logistics of getting through an interview process. So we do a good job on training managers on how to do interviews. We give them interview guides. We give them different criteria to navigate. We have assessments. We'll do debriefs. But in that, we almost forget to train them how to be ambassadors of your recruiting process. Do you spend time with them? Do you spend time with them coaching them on how to engage candidates? Have you educated them on the different expectations of generations from that hiring process and what experience they have? Do you use them to evangelize their own jobs and opportunities? I bet it's staggering if you took a look at how few of your hiring managers, who are the first to complain about not having a candidate pool, and anybody who says their hiring managers don't complain about that, I don't believe it, are not out there evangelizing their own opportunities and helping you help themselves, or helping themselves help you. So you do need to take a look and say, well, how can you create more alignment in your organization to get more people doing recruiting for you than just recruiters? Because guess who the candidates want to hear from? They care about what do people in similar positions to the one that they're interviewing for say about the job. Not just the hiring manager, not the recruiter, but they want to hear credible frontline feedback. They want to be able to see a broader view of the organization versus just those involved in the hiring process. So leverage those. One organization that we work with will have a rotation of who's doing different Facebook posts. Of course, it's a voluntary, you can't require that, but you can ask for voluntary participation, and we'll push out posts and information through a rotation. The cost is just a little bit of time to coordinate, but it has a much broader reach. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm also not a naysayer on technology, because just like all of you, I know what it's like to do more with less, and not all automation is bad. So there are some things to look at, and if you do have a more systematic approach to your recruiting, do take a look and at least audit its capabilities, that the tools and systems actually speed up the process. Here's an example. There's some automated scheduling tools that work really well, especially in high volume non-exempt roles, where the volume of recruiting coordination is there. It might speed up the experience for a candidate. That's very positive for certain profiles of positions. The challenge is, as we layer on a one-size-fits-all approach, we may be actually driving that same practice to professional or exempt experienced individuals who would find that a complete turnoff. So just make sure that while your positive impacts of technology are there for the appropriate levels, make sure that you're not assuming that it's one-size-fits-all for the experience of each person. Another thing that we really encourage you to evaluate is the remote interview capabilities. There's a lot of tools in the marketplace that allow you to have Skype-like experiences with candidates, leveraging video interviewing or video interviews that are recorded for ease of sharing within an organization. There are so many positive benefits of that engagement. Again, target your profile, target your generations. Could be something that's not only going to speed up the time and engagement with candidates, but it could also be a cost management tool, so you can apply the expense that we exude on candidate travel somewhere else that needs it. And then look at candidate engagement programs where possible. So I know pipelining for talent is such an important factor, and it's always on our minds as HR professionals, and it's very, very hard to do. Hard to do in a couple of ways. One, we're so busy trying to fill the current open positions. Knowing that we want a pipeline for higher demand positions is critical, but we just don't have the bandwidth. So using technology, are you using either the CRM component of an applicant tracking system, or do you have a CRM that could also buffer for you and help you keep engaged with candidates that you might not be able to hire today? Do you have an automated approach to keeping them engaged? Sending them the company newsletter, sending out a blog once in a while, getting a little video vignette out to them to review and keep them engaged. It doesn't take a lot. It does take, though, some good technology, and that's another positive outcome of technology. So let's just kind of go into the home stretch here and talking about just building this inspired and flexible recruiting model. You might say, yeah, this all sounds good. I understand I need to do it. I'm just having a hard time figuring out how to get started. I will say that the best place to start is just with your workforce planning. This is hard. Companies have a really hard time projecting their hiring needs. You can spend all day looking at trends and when did turnover happen in the past and what were the spikes and the considerations, but there's always those anomalies that come in. But you do still need to at least make the attempt to look at your workforce planning. And that doesn't just include numbers of hires or types of hires. But I encourage you to go a little deeper as HR professionals as you start to profile the types of individuals that will fill those roles. So if you're going to hire 50, 25, 10 sales professionals next year, what are the profiles of those individuals? What are the demographics? What is the generational impact that you have to consider based on the experience you need for the job? Are you going to hire millennials? Are you going to hire more experienced, seasoned individuals? Is it a Gen X group? You really need to take a look and say, okay, if that's what my trend shows, I'm going to be hiring these types of positions to an X generation, then go map your recruitment strategy to that. You won't be able to customize for every single group, but you can at least have a fighting chance to prioritize. So I encourage you to really look at the demographics of your workforce planning and go deeper than just the projections of how many positions and where. The other is take a look at your current active opening strategy. A great audit process is pick 3 distinctly different jobs and audit the experience a candidate has engaging in that process, from where they learn about the opportunity to what their communication and engagement is with the recruiting process. What do the hiring managers say is the employer value proposition to that candidate? My guess is you'll get a different story from each person you talk to if you don't have a designed and defined EVP. Go through the application and logistic process, each step and how long that takes. We talk about that as being the candidate shelf life. I always joke that candidates are tweakings. They're not going to be able to last forever. And so live a day in the life through your process. Then you can prioritize what felt great, what didn't feel good and you'd want to change, and what was adequate in the process, and just prioritize how you would tweak it. You might find that you would tweak your applicant tracking experience and the automated generated notes that people get, the emails they get. You might change where you're seeking the people in the first place. You might even change where you're spending your money. Something to think about. Go through and evaluate with an audit. Then develop, I missed a word here, develop a strategy for ongoing or specialized needs and pipelining strategy. We underestimate all of the time the importance of pipelining. We generally know that there are positions that tend to come up in a volume perspective. Treat them as if they're an open requisition and create your strategy for that. If you give it the dedicated time, I promise you on the back end, it will pay off for your team and your recruiting efforts later. Look at your overall recruiting process. Is it too cookie cutter? Is it going where your candidates hang out? A great place to start is look at social media footprint. Are you reaching the right candidate? What are the demographics? A great place to partner is with your marketing team on this. Their input and experience is so valuable. And then lastly, take the time to define your EVP. Be clear about your differentiators, and then create organizational evangelists. These are people who should be able to tell the story consistently and accurately. Just be very real in it, because it doesn't take long for candidates or employees to know that, yeah, that's great that you say that, but that's not how we really operate. You have to get at the really core nuggets of that. And then don't be afraid to build something different. Try something. If it doesn't work, I always say, the worst thing that can happen is something goes wrong and you fix it. Try something a little bit different. Spend money on things that count and get rid of the things that don't, get rid of what doesn't have a positive impact. Make sure you're visible. Make sure that every employee is a recruiter. Really engage in your employee referral program. Again, the cheapest source of hires and one of the best. Good people know other good people. That pay a premium for that. Engage and incent people for that. It's a very proud thing for employees to do. If you have a very low engagement or a very low percentage of your hires coming from employee referrals, there might be a couple of things happening. One is they may not actually even know how to go about engaging. They might feel intimidated and don't know what story to tell. Or even third, they might feel like it's not worth their time. So go and seek and dig into that a little bit. Again, most cost-effective, best source of hiring. And then ask your candidates for feedback, those you hired and those that you didn't. And then, of course, when you take a look at it, you have to look at and say, great, this all sounds good. I still don't have enough resources to get done the day-to-day of what I need to do. We encourage you to take a look at what outsourcing, what makes sense. There are just some things organizationally that don't make sense to outsource. But one thing that you should take, maybe some give yourself a little, cut a little slack for yourself, is you don't have to be an expert at it all. You don't have to be a talent acquisition expert. As a matter of fact, most organizations don't have talent acquisition experts in them, with the exception of maybe they have invested in moving forward with more of a talent management, talent acquisition director, leadership focus. But you shouldn't feel like you have to know it all. There's so many experts out in the field that can help you carve out niches, and it doesn't have to be expensive. You certainly can get at your targeted needs and outsource the things that will give you bandwidth. Spend your money wisely. And then we, of course, always caution against working with partners that are rigid. If their program or their process is so turnkey, you're going to end up with a cookie cutter response or result that looks like everyone else, which is the exact opposite of what you're trying to build here. Make sure you've got quality outsourced partners that can help you. Your initiative, your story, what makes you different should matter to them. That's what they should be seeking to engage and trying to help you with. So if you don't feel like you can do an evaluation on the candidate experience, somebody can come in and run that for you and give you the feedback on what the experience was. Not a bad idea because it's an unbiased view. So look for those ways to leverage maybe one-time outsourcing opportunities, bring those partners in with you, and then when they're done, they move on and give you the information you need. So again, I say don't be afraid of being different. Be afraid of being the same as everyone else. That's one of my favorite sayings, is in the recruiting world, different is good. It will help you weed out the candidates that aren't the right fit and help you focus and attract more of those that do. And think about the time savings if you're spending time with the right candidates, not just all candidates. So with that said, I want to leave a little time if there's some Q&A. I just do want to mention about the Novo group. We have 5 distinct practice offerings. The first 4 listed here are rooted in all things talent acquisition, whether an organization is pipelining or hiring for one position to thousands. We do have custom solutions that we work on with our clients to help target exactly what you need as far as talent acquisition support and strategy. And we also offer our talent effectiveness solution, which is really the wraparound talent solutions that target custom consulting opportunities.